The West is in real danger. Donald Trump's tariff war has caused another meltdown on America's stock market overnight. And the pressure is splitting Trump's team, with Elon Musk, owner of X and Trump's head of cutting waste, now calling Trump's tariffs guru, Peter Navarro, dumber than a sack of bricks and a moron. But now something even more dangerous that might seem unrelated. Trump's tariff war may in fact be merging with real wars. Two Chinese soldiers fighting for the Russians have just been captured in Ukraine. The Ukraine's president says there are more and he wants answers from China. The US says it's also really worried about this. Russian military bloggers have even filmed other Chinese soldiers also fighting for the Russians. Now, they could be mercenaries, but China could now be helping Russia militarily to pressure Donald Trump into giving up on Ukraine and letting Russia win. And if the US did walk away, it would split the West, split the US and Europe, which would be massive, a massive win for China. So why do I connect this with Trump's trade war? Because China has meanwhile hit back at Trump's tariffs with its own tariffs on American imports. And Trump in turn today increased his to a crippling 104%.
It was a mistake for China to retaliate. The president, when America is punched, he punches back harder.
Trump's tariffs could sabotage China's weak economy, but this also involves national pride after Vice President J.D. Vance insulted the Chinese.
We borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture. That is not a recipe for economic prosperity.
听到这位副总统说出这样无知又缺乏礼貌的话，令人诧异，也感到悲哀。
So if things really get out of hand, then what? Possibly China could put pressure on Trump to drop the tariffs by putting pressure in Ukraine. It could invade Taiwan even, like it's threatened, and grab its semiconductor industry, which is absolutely critical for American technology. Now, none of this may happen, but with Donald Trump and this touchy Chinese dictatorship, who knows? Joining me is Sean Spicer, Trump's first White House press secretary. Sean Spicer, great to see you on yet another amazing day in American politics, world politics really. Is there any panic setting in at the White House about the fact that, again, another bad day on the stock market, it just gets worse and there's not really much sign yet of these trade deals that Donald Trump was saying would come and solve this whole tariff war?
Look, I was in the White House in the West Wing earlier today. These guys are feeling very, very bullish. I think they feel like this is where they want to be tomorrow. I've got Kevin Hassett on my podcast. These guys are feeling good, Andrew. I think that they're getting a lot of positive calls from these countries looking to negotiate it. I actually was with Prime Minister Netanyahu last night. Was trying to strike a deal with Donald Trump, not just on the tariff number, but on the non-tariff barriers. They keep doing these readouts of other countries that are in a similar place. I think the president feels like this might be a little painful for the first few, maybe week or so. But I think they think this is going to end up in a very good place for America, by the end of week 2 or 3.
Well, what do you make of this very spiteful brawl between the sort of trade guru, Donald Trump's trade guru, Peter Navarro, and Elon Musk, it's a hard man to have a fight with given his hundreds of millions of followers?
Well, not just his millions of followers, but his billions of dollars, right? I mean, the thing that's interesting, and I get, this is where I've known Peter a long time. We were on the first campaign together. But when you walk into a room and you say, not only am I the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, but I've built several big companies. They operate around the world. I know what it's actually like to sign both sides of a paycheck. You have a lot of credibility, and especially not just with other business leaders, but with the president of the United States. And so, look, I wish they weren't having this spat on Twitter in public. But, I will say this. I will echo a little of what Caroline said today, that the president has always valued, and when people ask me, what do we not know about Donald Trump, I tell them that despite the media narrative, he actually welcomes opposing views. And I think that's the thing he's getting today. And I'm glad. there's too much talk about, oh, he surrounded himself with loyalists and sycophants. Look at the reality here on this big, huge trade debate. He's got Elon Musk very clearly in one camp, Peter Navarro and Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, in another. That's healthy. That's good.
Now, you mentioned, and it's true, Netanyahu said, let's, Israel's prepared to drop all its trade barriers and its tariffs, but Donald Trump still wouldn't say yes and will do the same. No deal was concluded. But whatever the West does, the key sticking point now is China. China is really aggressive. It's hit America with its own trade restrictions. And now Donald Trump has retaliated by jacking up their tariffs to over 100%. And you've got J.D. Vance, meanwhile, calling the Chinese peasants, whereas and the Chinese are taking great exception to that. Where is this going? Because that is now merging with some nationalist agenda.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because I kind of look at everything that's happening in one big group and then China as its own little subset issue, which is probably not that little of a subset issue. But you get my point that I think there's all the other countries and then China specifically. As for me, I'm actually glad we're standing up to China the way that we are. It's been way too long. We have gotten abused by China since they entered the WTO in the early 2000s. They are not the responsible stakeholder. They are not embracing capitalism. They steal from us our intellectual property. They do these tech transfers. They've flooded the market on a lot of cheap goods. They have stolen from us, spied on us, sent us COVID. I'm excited we're doing this. Now, that all being said, I think that we need a very clear strategy. What are we trying to achieve from China? What is it that we want? Because I think one of the critiques that I would have of the current policy is there's three kind of buckets that this administration is putting itself in. Donald Trump's talked for 40 years about reciprocal trade. If they're at 10, we should be at 10. If they go to 0, we go to 0. I'm 100% on board on that. That's a market access argument, right? Then you've got other people in the government saying that we're going to erase our deficit or our debt with all the money that we bring in. Well, that undermines the reciprocal trade argument because if you do that, then that means you got to keep the tariffs on. And then third is that there's a discussion about trying to bring jobs back, to onshore them into America. Again, I'm on board on that. But it seems in conflict with some of the other policies that they're pursuing right now. So I think first and foremost, they have to define what success looks like in China. Are we trying to bring back more manufacturing? Are we trying to lower the trade deficit with them? But the Trump administration, I think, is going to find a lot of support when it comes to taking on China. What I think they need to do is have a very, very clear and concise messaging and communication strategy with respect to China and what we're seeking to do there.
Well, that brings me to the fourth agenda, which you didn't mention. I agree with everything you said about the other three, and that is weakening China, quite specifically weakening the world's greatest tyranny and America's greatest threat. I mentioned the soldiers are now being sent, well, or volunteering, we don't know, to fight with Russia. I'm just wondering, is there an agenda here to weaken China? Is that actually one of the things here, and how would China respond to that?
Well, look, their economy isn't what it used to be. I mean, their target growth right now is 5%, which is much lower than it's been. But there's a difference. Obviously, the way China is controlled by Xi Jinping is they can tolerate a lot. They can treat their people in a lot different way than we can in America. So there's a lot more built into what they can do to their own people than we can do here in America. I do think it's important, though, that we stand up to them. And it's a balancing act. Remember, they own a lot of our debt, and we rely on them for a lot of cheap goods that come from China. So until we're ready to embrace manufacturing back here in America, we have to recognize that there is a necessary relationship.
Look, these are momentous times, and history seems to be in absolute fast forward at the moment. Sean Spicer, thank you so much for your time.
Always. Thanks, Andrew.